You're back with Miss O'Kaylee for another Sleep Tight with a chapter a night. We are on to chapter 8 of Dominic, our crazy dog who just met a pig and hung out with him for a little while, and the pig gifted him his fortune, which we're not sure what that is, but then the pig died. So it's kind of a sad chapter, but interesting because we're going to get to find out, I hope, what he left Dominic. So here we go, chapter 8. Chapter 7. Dominic went out for a long walk and did a lot of thinking. He was still walking when the stars came out. Mournful, he lay down on the ground and looked at the stars. Life was mysterious. Bartholomew Badger had been alive long before there was a Dominic, long before anybody had even thought there would ever be such a dog. 2 hours ago, Bartholomew Badger was still alive, but now he was gone. There was no Bartholomew Badger. There was only a memory. His turn was over. Dominic's turn was still at the beginning. There were many who hadn't yet even begun to exist, but they would be sometime in the future, a whole new world of creatures, some important, some not, and many of them wondering about life just as Dominic was wondering now. It would be their turn, and then Dominic's turn would be over. Many of them would think about the past, which was now the present, but by then what was now the future would have become the present. What? Somehow, this kind of thinking made Dominic feel more religious than usual. He fell asleep under the vast dome of quivering stars, and just as he was falling asleep, passing over into the phase of dreams, he felt he understood the secret of life. But in the light of morning when he woke up, his understanding of the secret had disappeared with the stars. The mystery was still there, inspiring his wonder. He returned to the house. He was not of a mind to eat breakfast. He was not in the mood. He went to the tool shed to get Mr. Badger's shovel, and he labored in the morning sun. Digging a deep hole, he dug the hole under a tall oak tree as old as Mr. Badger in the front yard, and he buried the pig in a hole. Then he leaned on the shovel to rest the wooden handle warm on his work. The moment he stopped being busy, he felt his heart quake. He had to cry. Life was suddenly too sad, and yet it was beautiful. The beauty was dimmed when the sadness welled up, and the beauty would be there again when the sadness went. So the beauty and the sadness belonged together somehow, though they were not the same at all. That's a pretty sentence. Dominic couldn't abide being in the doldrums for long. The doldrums were dreary, and Dominic's spirit was sprightly. It liked to frolic, so he had to get moving. He shook off the dumps, and since he was still holding the shovel with which he had buried Mr. Badger, he went to dig up the treasure. Ooh, we get to find out what it is. He walked to the pear tree in back of the house, got his bearings from a weather vane in the roof which showed the 4 main directions of the world, and faced due south with his back to the tree. Then he carefully marked off 103 paces and stopped, looking for the 4 stones forming a square that the pig had described. They weren't there. Perhaps he had made a mistake. Be calm. He went back to the pear tree, made sure he was facing in the right direction, and paced off 103 paces again. Again, there were no stones. He sat down to think. When Mr. Badger was talking about paces, he thought he was talking about his own paces, pig paces, not dog paces. He jumped up, returned to the pear tree once more, and counted off 103 paces and kept going due south. At 151 Dominic paces, he found the 4 black stones Mr. Badger had spoken of. He removed them and dug. That was smart. Below the topsoil, his shovel struck something hard. It turned out to be a small chest encircled with riveted metal bands. He dragged it out by its iron handle and opened it. It was brimful of precious pearls. Above all else, the pig had cherished pearls, and they were the last things he'd committed to the ground. Farther down was a second chest, a little bigger than the first. Dominic broke the lock open by hitting it with a rock. The chest was chock full of diamonds, rubies, emeralds, amethysts, sapphires, alexandrite, granites, and other precious stones, all in the form of brilliant necklaces, rings, earrings, nose rings, brooches, bracelets, lockets, and bangles. And when these objects lay exposed in the open sunlight, clear crystalline sparkles of vivid light slashed off in all directions. Dominic marveled at the spectacle. He dug still further. At the bottom of the hole, down in the hard pan, was a leather sack swollen with gold pieces. There was something else in the sack. As if to prove it was destiny that had sent Dominic out into the world and then led him to the pig's house and finally to the treasure, there was a piccolo, the very instrument he loved to play, made of solid gold. He tested this new instrument immediately. The notes were golden, like the instrument itself, the gems flashing in the sunlight, the joyful music pouring from his piccolo, and the wildflowers all around him swept away the remnants of his gloom. He was lost in delight. He was unaware that he'd been encircled by a host of hostile beings. All the members of the Doomsday Gang, 4 foxes, 3 weasels, 8 ferrets, a wildcat, a wolf, 6 tomcats, 2 dingoes, and a parcel of rats, armed to the teeth with various weapons, had formed a big ring around him, and were staring both at him and at the fabulous treasure from behind rocks, trees, hillocks, the house, the shed, the other outbuildings, and anything else that could hide them. Suddenly Dominic's nose, which had been acting absent-minded, came to attention. It told him there was trouble brewing. He stopped playing, looked, and saw enough to know he was surrounded. His spear! Where was his wonderful spear? He barked fiercely to intimidate his foes, raced to the house, seizing his spear, and dashed back to the treasure before the mob of villains could reach it. Then they closed in. What a battle royale raged. One Dominic against ever so many. The entire Doomsday Gang. They tried to grab any part of the treasure they could. They tried to subdue Dominic, but he was not to be bested, not to be subdued. It wasn't that he cared that much for the treasure. He hated any kind of villainy. The villains wielded their weapons, swung their daggers, clubs, and swords. They attacked from the side, rushed in from the rear as well as from the front, but Dominic handled his wild spear with such swiftness, such force and ferocity, such cunning, that no scoundrel managed to touch the treasure. Such a clashing and flashing of weapons in the sun's brightness. Never had anyone fought so ferociously, so fastidiously as Dominic did to protect the pig's precious jewels and his own precious self. This band of noxious nobodies had made the good pig miserable with their sneaky ways, and he was determined that not one of them should get a single pearl, nor did it take the hole he had just dug to make him remember the hole they once thought they had him cornered in. The battle went on and on and on, and finally Dominic began to weary. So many against one, the villains could rest, could get a second wind, 1, 2, 3 at a time. But Dominic had no rest at all. He was panting furiously. He knew his strength couldn't last much longer. He would have to abandon the treasure and run if he wanted to go on living. He looked around for a way out. There was none. Then he heard something, dimly at first, then rapidly getting louder. There was a most remarkable buzzing. The air was filled with the humming din of thousands of angry yellow jackets, who swarmed from all points of the campus and funneled in on the members of the Doomsday Gang, stinging right and left and in between. What a howling and yelling erupted, what a caterwauling, what shrieks, yelps, and screams, what running and tumbling, what diving into ditches, what scrambling to hide in deep grass among trees and bushes, even in brambles. The horde of avenging wasps drove the defeated Doomsday Devils all over the summer landscape and out of sight. It was a rout, but one wasp remained, and before he took off after the others, he made sure he had Dominic's attention and described these words in the air. Remember me. Oh, remember me. Thank you, yelled Dominic. You're welcome, and thank you, wrote the wasp. Oh, I like that. Dominic is really a good fighter, isn't he? And so awesome that the wasps came and avenged him. So that's chapter 7. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it lets you sleep great tonight. See you soon.